The chapter of space. 导引语 1. Introduction. 介绍 Till now, humans are familiar with only one side of the space. Namely, they only know the space of the material world and don't understand the space in the anti-world. We falsely believe that only the environment on the Earth is suitable for human living. And after landing on the Moon and taking photos of the Mars, we are, after short time excitement, sad to feel that the neighbors of the Earth are not suitable for human living, and it is an impossible task to reach the more distant planets. Tragedies happen frequently due to our knowledge shortage of the negative universe. Our confusion about the future has limited our vision within the present time and current life. All of life we live in hurry, worry, and tension, neglecting the life value and meaning and mess our life which should have been beautiful. The science and technology has been developing rapidly, such as the virtual space of internet, nanometer technology, cloning, genetic code and decoding, hypertelescopic photos of the outer space, and applications of atomic and ionic energy. The development should have stimulated the human thinking and led us to know the antimatter's negative space, the life meaning and the establishment of a brand new value system, giving us a better, easier and more enlightened life. Nevertheless, the achievements in science and technology have strengthened the people's consciousness of material existence, hindered us from probing into the negative universe, made the people busier, more nervous and worried. The relationship between humans and the society is closer. The relationship between humans themselves are more intensified. The human freedom is much reduced. People are kept farther away from their natural attributes and closer to the robotic features. The human beings are now on an accelerating train without brakes. Even those old farmers living in the most distant areas have to take the express train whether they are willing or not. The driving force of the train comes from the human beings, but the biorobots will drive and manage the train, mechanizing all the people on it. We find it difficult to understand the negative space and think it belongs to the unreliable metaphysics. In fact, when our wisdom is upgraded to a certain degree, we can see it. The human eyes can only see the light rays ranging between 400 mm and 700 mm length, and human ears can only hear the sound ranging between 20 and 20,000 Hz frequency. There is no water in the middle of the sea swirls. The center of the hurricane is at great peace. So we can't conclude those we can't see do not exist, or those we can't hear are silent. Everyone has dreams. Are you really there in your own dream? If not, why do you have consciousness in the strange dream environment with desires and emotions? Yes, then who is the guy lying on the bed? So the sleeping person on the bed and the moving person in the dream are all you. The only difference is that you are in different spaces. The space in the dream is the negative space. There are many negative spaces in the universe and dream space is only one of them. We need to understand the concept of space by using the ideas of Sakya and Einstein's theory of relativity. Sakya said, "In a tiny dust, there are many limitless Chahai worlds. In the worlds there are dusts too. And in these dusts there are also many worlds and the process repeats. Chahai represents the world and the tiny dust stands for the universe. For instance, 1 nanometer compared with a grain of sand is just a tiny dust. Compared with the Earth, a grain of sand is a tiny dust. Compared with the Milky Way system, the Earth is a tiny dust. Compared with the Earth universe, the Milky Way system is a tiny dust. With the large universe, the Earth universe is a tiny dust." Einstein once said, "Relativity space is endowed with physical qualities. In this sense, therefore, there exists an ether. The non-materials are the contrast of the materials. The negative space is the opposite of the space. The celestial beings are the contrast of the human beings. The intangible life is the opposite of the tangible life. A leaf, a water drop, and a sand grain are all a mammoth world. A silicon chip of 1 square mm can store all the books in a large library. An electrical pulse of a frequency can carry numerous things. A human body includes 130 trillion lives. A sand grain can hold thousands of villages. For a life body that can only be seen under an electron microscope, humans are the giants. For a human being, the Earth as a living life body is a titanic giant. However, when the time-space changes, 100 million people can live on a grain of sand and will not feel crowded. In different spaces, The life has their distinctive living conditions and food system. We can never understand the living conditions and food systems of the people living in another time-space based on our own. At the same time, we cannot regard those living in another time-space have the same height or weight as we do. You might think I am just talking about nonsense when I tell you that you can live on the planet several million light years away. That's because you don't understand the negative universe speed. So what is the negative universe speed? It is the moving speed of the antimatters. For example, a person working at the Antarctic workstation misses his hometown very much. His thinking can immediately go to his hometown. Though his body is still in the Antarctic, his thinking and consciousness is in the hometown. This is the negative universe speed. For the sake of understanding, I assume the negative universe speed at 1 light year per second. The actual speed is faster than that. When we enter the space tunnel, we go at the negative universe speed.
空间的含义
The meaning of the space. 界分 The locations where the matters and antimatters are and their movement scope are called the space. The space is decided by the material existence and distribution. The negative space is determined by the non-material existence and distribution. There will be no space without the materials, and there will be no negative space without the non-materials. The space includes absolute and relative spaces. The absolute space refers to the space that can expand unlimitedly. The relative space refers to the space between an object and the surrounding objects. The spaces are everywhere all the time. There is space between the galaxies and between the atoms. The space also includes the negative and positive spaces. The space where the materials exist is called the positive space. The space where the non-materials exist is called the negative space. The human bodies exist in the positive space while the spiritual bodies exist in the negative space. The positive space twists, swells, contracts, or disappears with the size of the object's mass, energy, and forms. It is a relatively stable space. The negative space changes abruptly and has limitless changes in a short while. The space can change the forms and movement laws of objects. The different spaces decide the different movement laws and forms of the objects. For instance, the figure of the people living in the frigid zones is different from that of those living in the tropical environment. The urban people have different looks from those living in the rural areas, the fishermen and the shepherds. The growth model, blossoming and fruiting timing of the grass in the deserts are different from those living the forest or highlands. The monkeys in the scenic areas have different capability of survival from those living in the forests. The men who get along with women for a long time have different tempers and personality with those staying longer with the other men. The mentality and behavior between businessmen and priests are different. The people working in the temples have different thinking from those working for the government. The space change can arouse the people's change in physical function, thinking ways, and mentality. The disease contracted in the cold and moist regions will get cured automatically in the warm and dry zones. The disease contracted in cities will get cured in the rural areas. The people having average performance will achieve great success when transferred to another place. The low-rank government official might make a great deal of money if doing business. The space change often leads to the change of situations. If one wants to change his life, he has to change the activity space. Otherwise, he will die without any change or progress. The space is changing. It can be expanded, compressed, or twisted. When the mass of one object is equal to that of another object, the space between them is in linear arrangement. When they are not equal, the space between them will be expanded, compressed, twisted, and arranged in the form of an umbrella or rotation. When the mass of an object, we can call it the energy, is bigger than the total of the surrounding object's mass, energy, the space between them is the linear stable space and the object is the mass center of the space. For the small mass objects, the space distance between the small mass objects and this big quality, high energy, object is expanded. However, for the high energy object, the space distance has been compressed. Contrary to the negative space, the big mass object, the space between the big mass object and the small mass objects has been expanded. For the small mass objects has been compressed. So for the genuine Christians' followers, Yahweh and Jesus just stay beside them, influencing their words and behaviors at all times. For Yahweh and Jesus, the Christians are staying distantly and the non-Christians even farther. The Muslims and Allah Muhammad, the Buddhists and Sakyamuni, the Taoists and Original Heaven Lord and Lao Tzu have the same space relationship. A bosom friend afar brings a distant land near. The space distance of thousands of km has been compressed into the wall-like distance. This is for the low-energy people only. For the high-energy people, even if you are standing in front of him, he feels you are far away at the other end of the world. This is why the people with the highest energy feel the loneliest. Even if they are standing in a chaotic market, they feel isolated and mournful.
"空间的利用
The use of space. 接缝. The living space is vital for the humans. Different spaces have different life meanings. The ultimate goal of human life should be the senior space life, instead of the junior space life. The space can change the object's form and their movement laws. The space change can trigger the changes in the physical function, thinking modes and activities. The space can be expanded, compressed or twisted, so we have to make full use of the space.
一超越空间
1. Surmounting the space. What we see in our eyes is where we are going. The space that our consciousness, the telegnosis, can perceive as the space where our spiritual nature life will be after the death of the flesh body. So we have to surmount the existent space where we are now, extending our thought to the senior space with our thinking, imagining and knowing the situation in the 1,000-year world, 10,000-year world and the Elysium world, reinforcing our belief so that our psychology and mentality can move towards the senior space. If we can persist in doing so, the space in our imagination will move towards us. We will realize our dream and lay the foundation for the spiritual body of life to enter the senior space after the death of the flesh body.
二压缩和扩张空间
2. Compress and expand the space. Can the space be compressed? The answer is yes. Bosom friends within the 4 seas are close neighbors though separated by great distance. After the internet came into being, the remote distance is right in front of our eyes. The space changes as the size and location of the materials and the life consciousness change. If the matters do not exist, there will no consciousness or space. One way to compress the space is to strengthen the space. As our perception of a certain space deepens, the distance between the space and us will narrow. When our consciousness is integrated into the space, the spiritual body of life will reach the space. Then we can leave the mortal world and enter the charming senior space in our consciousness. The way to expand the space is to gradually get out of the space in our consciousness we don't like, keep the space we don't like away from our consciousness, expand it till it disappears. Thus we can get out of and surmount the space we don't like and develop into the senior space of life. The way we get out of the worldly life is to expand our space. The way to enter the celestial world is to compress the space between us and the celestial space. If we can freely expand and compress spaces, we can surmount the space and free ourselves from the constraint by the space.
3. 改变空间
3. Change the space. If the space where we live has constrained us from employing our freedom and competency, or has put us at risk, we must find some way to change the space and instead of waiting for the space to change by itself. If we don't change the space will change us. Only by setting our direction and target can we realize our ideals gradually. To make use of the space in the most effective way, we must first understand the origin, function, and meaning of life. The following 2 chapters, Humans and Life, will discuss the target. Please see the chapter of Humans.
36维空间
36-dimensional spaces. According to the level of the life mass energy of matters and antimatters, there are 36 dimensions in the spaces. They are Colorless space, double color space, mortal world, cause effect space, between yin and yang space, human celestial being space, proton space, photon space, light speed circle, super light space circle, molecule world, micro world, law world, retention information space, super time space, macro world, time tunnel, holographic order world, zero world, heaven world, Elysium world, cathode black hole body, 10,000-year world, 1,000-year world, dream world, anode black hole world, livestock world, animal world, plant world, insect world, bacteria world, landscape and climate world, hell world, frozen layer and inflamed world.
一维空间，无色间。
One-dimensional space, colorless space. It is a space where we can't see the size, form, or color of the objects. Living in this space, we are just like the blind. The polar nights or the polarites belong to the colorless space. The Taiji space before the universe is born is a one-dimensional space. For the humans, the anti-world is a one-dimensional space. All the antimatters are one-dimensional in nature. That's why we can't see the consciousness, thinking, soul, Buddha, celestial being, Tao law, heaven world, Elysium world, dream world, hell world, frozen layer or inflamed layer. From the perspective of the one-dimensional space of the antimatters, all of us human beings are the blind people. We can't see things in the space just like the blind people who can't see the beautiful flowers and other things in this world. We see nothing and have on knowledge of the antimatter one-dimensional space.
二维空间，双色间。
Two-dimensional space, the double color space. In this space, the objects have sizes and forms, but they only have the light and shade colors. For instance, the achromatopsia people live in the double color space. The scenes in the hell world, frozen layer and inflamed layer, are just like the images in black and white TV with only light and shade colors. If one person judges things only by good and bad, true and false, good and evil, and beauty and ugly, instead of seeing the bad in the good in the bad, the false in the true in the false, the good in the evil in the good, the beauty in the ugly in the beauty, the static in the dynamic and the dynamic in the static, his thinking would be the achromatopsia thinking, and he actually lives in the two-dimensional world. The space which only has the direct lines without curves, and the direct lines have no obliquity from the perspective of either primary vision, overlook or sectional view, is the two-dimensional space.
三维空间，人间。
Three-dimensional space, mortal world. In this space, substances have forms and sizes are rich in colors. The space is constantly changing. The mortal world is a three-dimensional space. 98% of the human population and most of the animals except the birds live in this space. The three-dimensional space is a knotless space. The movement of all matters is a knotless line, just like a rope fastened to a person's foot. No matter how many turns he or she makes, no matter which direction he or she goes, though the rope has many twists or pile into a geometric pattern, it will become a straight when we pull the two ends of it. And there is no knot in this line. The three-dimensional space is a relatively simple and V space. It is a space where we live without making efforts.
四维空间，因果间。
Four-dimensional space, the karma space. It is the thinking space where we can know the karma relationship. The human beings walk in the three-dimensional space while the birds fly in the four-dimensional space. The flight route of the birds can have knots, so the four-dimensional space is the knotted space. From the perspective of the three-dimensional space, we can only see the part of the tree above the ground. However, from the perspective of the four-dimensional space, we can see the tree roots under the ground. Based on the material changes in the mortal world, we can see through the phenomenon and detect the essence of things, the relationship between them, the interactive bridges, and the causes of the changes. We can also see through a certain phenomenon and find the future results. We can know the principle of quantitative and qualitative changes. We know how to achieve balance. We can find the truth out of the routine phenomena. We can find the thinking space of the laws. For instance, we can perceive the universal gravitation when seeing the apple falling to the ground. We can think about the movement rules and direction of the universe when seeing the vine growing in spirals. We can reach the knowledge about the terrestrial magnetism and ocean currents when we see the swirls formed by releasing the water out of the bathtub. We can know the function of the motion power when we see the kettle lid jumping as the water boils. We can perceive the irrigation and power generation when seeing the wind and tides. We can know about the disease and disease-spreading ways when we see the bacteria under the microscope. We can get the mystery of the genes when we see the different forms of the objects. We can conclude the life origin from the gene invariants and genetic features. We can know about a person's health and personality when see his complexion and face. We can predict a person's future success or failure when seeing his behaviors and listening to his words. We can see the rise and fall of a dynasty by observing the dedication of the government officials and the mentality of the civilians. Those living in the four-dimensional space include the greatest scientists such as Newton, Einstein, Stephen Hawking, Euclid, Copernicus, Mendel, Heisenberg, Kepler, Dalton, Röntgen, Mendeleev, Planck, Pasteur, the political leaders such as Washington, Mao Zedong, Constantine the Great, Peter the Great, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Augustus, and Caesar, the musicians such as Beethoven, Handel, and Bach, the philosophers such as Aristotle, Plato, and Bacon.
五维空间，阴阳两界间。
Five-dimensional between yin and yang space. It is the rim space in the crossing between the matters and antimatters and between the space and the negative space. Three types of people find it easy to enter this space. The first type is the specialists in a field. When one person is addicted to or reaches the peak in the study of one issue or one thing, he feels, though not very clearly, the existence of supermaterials. Sometimes he feels he can't find the interconnection bonds between the things in the actual world. Sometimes he feels that something happens in an incredible way. For instance, why the people who have dug the tombs of the Egyptian pharaoh die a natural death? Why did one of the twins feel worried at the same moment when his brother died from the traffic accident thousands of miles away? Why could the girl called Shanti Devi, born in Delhi of India in 1926, tell exactly the things in her former cycle of life, which proved to be true? Why was the coffin of famous American actor Charles Cleveland, who died in 1899 and buried in Galveston of Texas, brought into the sea by the tides, floating 28 years and 3,000 kilometers before reaching his hometown, the Prince Edward Island? These things have made him feel that the things he used to study were much too trivial and insignificant. He still can't tell what's true and what's false when faced with the matters and antimatters. All things seem to the reality and the fantasy at the same time. If his flesh body dies now, his spiritual body will be in the state of puzzlement. Though his flesh body has died, the spiritual body of his can't find the way out and can only roam in the edgy place when the material world is connected with the non-material world. The second type is those who practice or improve himself blindly. Due to the wrong method, too much hurry, old age, or bad health, the spiritual body after the death of the flesh body can only drift in the connection place of the yin and yang worlds. The third type is those who feel like getting into the unnecessary end, or those who died suddenly at their golden age. Because they are not well prepared for death and still long for the material world, they are not willing to be brought to another world by the sudden death. Some of their wishes haven't been realized and they are reluctant to leave the material world. However, because their flesh bodies are dead, the spiritual bodies have no carrier and can only roam for a certain time in the connection space between yin and yang worlds. Some cases of spirit possession are caused by their spiritual bodies. The people who are not willing to die would stay in this space. In the rural areas, the monks or yin-yang masters will help to release the souls of the dead people. The ceremony is just to comfort them, encourage and persuade them to enter the yin world and forget about the things in the yang world.
六维空间，人仙界。
Six-dimensional space, the humans and this space is where the people having got out of the material world constraint live. When a person's belief is perfect innocent and he or she is not seduced by the worldly materials, they just look the same with the average people. But their inner part has been changed. They have known the negative universe is the origin of the matters, everything in the three-dimensional world is simply the fantasy, the worldly people will get nothing even if they are busy working and struggling all the time, the people will end up in a dream and they are ignorant. The people in this space don't have to work to get something. They work for pleasure, not means of making a living. They have known the Holy Spirit, Buddhism and Taoism. They know how to make use of the energy in the negative universe to serve them. Basically, they can make achievement by thinking about them. So they are free of the worries and live an unloaded life. Except for the human celestial beings whose flesh bodies are still alive because of their self-refinery and self-improvement, the few mages, Taoists, Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, and the believer of other regions can also enter this space.
为空间，质子界。
7-dimensional space, the proton world. This is a space where the proton can be seen. The proton is one of the elementary particles forming the nucleus of the atoms. It has the positive electron. Its electricity is equal to the electron, but the mass is 1,836 times of that in the electron. In this space, the people can have the perspective as far as their eyesight can reach. It seems that the people are wearing the infrared glasses and can see what is behind a certain object. For instance, they can see the jewels and gold under the ground. They can see the people's inner organs. They can see the flowing water under the ground. In the three-dimensional world, the people can only see the branches, leaves, and fruits. However, the people in the proton world can see the worms climbing on the tree. The beauties in the eyes of the three-dimensional world are simply skeletons in the eyes of the people in the proton world.
八维空间，光子界。
8-dimensional space, the photon world. It is the space where the rays are beyond the 400 to 700 millimeters wavelengths. The photon is the elementary particle of the light. It has certain energy which changes to the wavelengths. The shorter the wavelength is, the more energy it has. Many lights are invisible to the human eyes. Only those who have certain level of energy can see them. In this space, the people can have the perspective farther than their eyesight range. They can see through the substances with high density, strength, and energy. The objects will not show up in their original forms. Instead, they will show up in the form of light in different colors. The substances with low density, strength, and energy are invisible, just like the molecule in the air. The worldly people busy in the world are just clusters of light-moving molecules. On the contrary, the self-improving people will emit the visible light with different colors based on the strength of their composure and psychokinesis.
九维空间，光速圈。
9-dimensional space, the light speed circle. The space where the light can reach within 1 second is called the light speed circle. The people in this space can have the remote viewing of things in the distance where the light will reach in 1 second. For instance, though the person is in Africa, he can clearly see his family members living in Asia. All the people living within the scope of 1 second light traveling can be seen by the people in the light speed circle.
十维空间，超光速圈。
10-dimensional space, the super light speed circle. The space where the light cannot reach within 1 second is called the light speed circle. The people in this circle can have the trans-space remote viewing. They can see all the scenes beyond the Milky Way system and the Rotary River system, in particular the life situation of the celestial beings in the 1,000-year world and 10,000-year world.
11维空间，分子界。
11-dimensional space, the molecule world. It is a space where the thinking energy of the nature shown by the molecules can be seen. The molecule is the smallest particle that can regain the chemical attributes of the original substances and can exist independently. The people in this space can see the nature of each type of molecules. For instance, the blood of an average people in the eyes of the worldly people is seen by the people living in the molecule world as a fully grown person who has his look and personality. If there are 2 drops of blood with 1 drop belonging to a dog and the other to a cow, we ordinary people cannot tell which is dog and which is cow. However, the people living in the molecule world can judge them. They even know the form of the grass by seeing the grass seed.
12维空间，微观世界。
12-dimensional space, the micro world. It is a space where people can ride a horse in the nanometer space. The tiny particles seen by an ordinary person in the